Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr have finally done something that, across more than 60 years of making music together and apart, they had somehow never managed to do. They recorded a proper duet. Not a cameo appearance, not an overdub layered onto someone else's session. A real, deliberate, sit across from each other recording called Home to Us. And from the moment it reached listeners, something cracked open in living rooms and cars and kitchens across the world. Paul McCartney is 82. Ringo Starr is 85. And between the two of them, they have watched more than a century of history move past. Somewhere in the middle of all of it, they happen to be in the most famous rock music group the world has ever produced. They stood on the Ed Sullivan Show stage when America still watched television in black and white, played their final rooftop concert above Apple Corps in London, and survived the particular madness of Beatlemania, which was unlike anything any human beings had been asked to endure before. And then they survived the end of the Beatles, which by most accounts was harder. What's left now is two men who have been friends for more than 60 years in the deepest sense of that word. Not business partners, not bandmates tied together by contract, but friends who have seen each other through the absolute worst of it. Paul has said over the years that Ringo makes him feel young, not because Ringo is young, but because Ringo has been the same warm, funny, generous person since the day they first met in Liverpool. And that kind of constancy turns out to be its own form of miracle. So why did 60 years pass first? The answer lives inside just how complicated life became after the Beatles fell apart in 1970. The breakup wasn't a quiet dissolving. It detonated. Lawsuits erupted between former members, legal battles over rights and royalties dragged on for years, and the Alan Klein era put John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr on one side of court proceedings, while McCartney fought from the other. Stepping into a studio together during those years wasn't just unlikely, it was legally and emotionally impossible. And that's when their separate lives took hold in earnest. Paul built wings into a solo career that would have made most artists envious regardless of where it came from, while Ringo made records, acted in films, and toured the world with his all-star band. They showed up on each other's solo work occasionally, Ringo playing drums on Paul's tracks, Paul contributing to Ringo's albums, but always as a guest, never as equals sharing the lead on the same song. A proper duet demands something different from both people. A kind of readiness that may only arrive when you're in your 80s and the arithmetic of time becomes impossible to ignore. What finally moved this from possibility to reality seems to trace back to Now and Then, the final Beatles track released in 2023, assembled using artificial intelligence to restore John Lennon's vocals from an old tape. Completing that song, hearing all four of them together in some form again, reminded Paul and Ringo that the music doesn't stop just because the calendar keeps moving. If anything, finishing Now and Then stirred something. A reminder that they're still here, that the story hasn't closed. Home to Us is a quiet song, and that's the first thing you register. The arrangement stays spare and deliberate, built from acoustic guitar, a gentle piano line, and brushed drums that land almost like a whisper. You can hear the room they recorded in, which is not an accident. This wasn't built to fill a stadium. It was built to feel like a conversation between two people who have known each other longer than most of their listeners have been alive. The melody carries that warmth McCartney has always known how to find, the note that sits right at the center of the chest and presses gently. What stands out, though, is how much room the song carves out for Ringo. His voice, never the flashiest instrument, always honest, carries the verses with a plainness that feels almost radical given who these two men are. No vocal acrobatics, no performance. Just two old friends singing to each other. The lyrical subject is exactly what the title promises. Home. Not a physical address. Home as a feeling. Home as the people who knew you before Liverpool turned into legend, before the screaming crowds and the rooftop and the worldwide fame that followed. At 82 and 85, that word carries decades of meaning. It means Hamburg. It means the Cavern Club. It means John Lennon and George Harrison. And every morning, and every loss, and every strange, beautiful, impossible thing that came with living the life they lived. And here's the detail that almost nobody has discussed yet. Buried in the bridge, there's a melodic phrase that Beatles scholars have recognized as closely resembling the opening bars of In My Life, one of the most beloved songs John Lennon ever wrote. Whether McCartney placed it there deliberately or it surfaced from somewhere deeper, doesn't change what it does. It floats in the middle of a song about home, like a quiet acknowledgement of the people who are no longer in the room, but somehow still present in it. Paul has spoken about the recording in terms that carry real reverence. Sitting across from Ringo and singing together as a proper duet for the first time, he described it as coming full circle, and he talked about looking at Ringo's face during the vocal tracking and feeling something he struggled to put into words. These are two men who have stood together at funerals, who sat side by side when John was shot in 1980 and the world stopped making sense, who were there for each other in 2001 when George Harrison died and the Beatles became permanently a pair. Recording this song felt like honoring all of it, not just the pop music, but the entire strange, beautiful, painful journey that started in Liverpool more than 6 decades ago. He also said something simpler, and it's the part that stays. Ringo makes him feel safe. In a world that has changed nearly beyond recognition, Ringo remains a constant, and making music together, finally, properly, as equals in the same song, felt like the most natural thing they had ever done, even though 60 years passed before they got there. When Home to Us reached the public, the response was quieter than Beatlemania and cut considerably deeper. People weren't screaming. They were crying at kitchen tables, calling their parents, texting their adult children links to the song with no words attached because no words existed for what they wanted to say. Social media filled with Beatles memories, first records purchased, concerts witnessed in 1964 and 1966, songs that carried people through divorces and losses and long, dark years. One fan who had been at Shea Stadium in 1965 as a teenager posted simply, "I never thought I'd hear something new from two of them again. I didn't know how much I needed this." That's the whole thing, right there in that one sentence. Home to Us is not a nostalgia project, and it's not two elderly men looking backward at what used to be. Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, at 82 and 85, chose to make something new, chose to show up, chose to say that the music connecting them to 60 years of listeners is not finished yet. Home, for these two men, is not a place they left. It's something they've been building together, note by note, for their entire lives. And with this song, they've added one more room. Before you go, there's something worth asking yourself. You've carried this music for years, maybe decades, and there's likely a specific moment attached to it, a song that found you at exactly the right time, a memory threaded so tightly into a Beatles record that the two have become inseparable. Drop that memory in the comments below, not because it needs to be said, but because this community is full of people who will understand it in a way that's hard to find anywhere else. And that kind of shared understanding is worth something. If this video landed for you, share it with one person who loves this music the way you do. A parent, a sibling, an old friend who still owns the vinyl. It takes about 4 seconds, and it means more than the algorithm will ever tell you. And if you want to stay in this conversation, subscribing keeps these videos finding their way to you, which is the quietest and most reliable way we have of staying connected. There's more coming. Stories about music, about time, about the people who made things that lasted. We'll see you in the next one.